A suitcase of regrets. A girl with lungs that whistle when the world gets small. A flight attendant who trusts rules until one mistake nearly costs a life. And a father, calm as an airfield before a storm, who knows the quietest word can stop a jet. When a black teen's medicine vanishes into a trash bag at 30,000 feet, the cabin becomes a courtroom, a chorus, a crucible. Before wheels up, one choice grounds a plane and unearths secrets nobody meant to carry on board. This is a love story born from turbulence, stitched by apology, and flown toward a landing forgiveness. Elena Novak had perfected the choreography of welcome. Smile with eyes first, then mouth. Shoulders squared but soft. The silver pin on her navy blazer aligned with the seam of her heart. It was the kind of polish that made regulars on Aurora Air flights greet her with a familiarity usually reserved for favorite baristas, or the nurse who remembers the sweet spot in your arm. At gate C11, she'd been working a double, and her clipboard listed every pre-boarding detail. Aisle chair request in 21C, peanut allergy flagged in 12A, father and daughter, Carter, connecting to Houston for a debate tournament. She circled that last one, though she didn't know why. Habit, maybe. Teenagers can be anxious flyers. Teenagers forget to drink water and then faint precisely when the captain turns on the seatbelt sign. By the time Group 3 began to board, the cabin pulsed with that pleated hum of departure. Overhead bins snapping shut like punctuation, the soft thuds of carry-ons, plastic placebos of comfort. Elena worked row 17 with practiced grace. The daughter in 17A, Amaya Carter, had a soft peach hoodie and a bright, sparky stare, the kind that carried both defiance and wonder. The father in 17B had quiet in his shoulders. He wore it well. His beard was trimmed to discipline, his voice lower than thunder but steadier. "Let me know if you need anything," Elena said, angling the trash bag toward a larger disposal at the galley. Her hands were already moving. Clear the cabin, get on schedule, when Amaya reached into her backpack and pulled out a small plastic case. "This has to stay with me," Amaya said, a nervous edge disguising itself as courtesy. "What is it?" Elena asked. "My nebulizer mouthpiece and a vial," Amaya said, holding out the plastic, clear and unmarked, except for a tiny handwritten A in blue ink. My pulmonologist, wrote the letter." She fumbled for the folded note, produce one that had rubbed its way to fuzz at the creases. Elena's breath caught, almost imperceptibly. Unlabeled liquid vials took her back to a different night. December, when a different unlabeled vial took her brother somewhere you can't fly to. "Not this," she told herself. "Stay with the checklist. Stay with the rules." The letter? Legitimate? The vial? Not in manufacturer packaging. Her training said medicines could travel, yes. Common sense said this was a mouthpiece, not a weapon. Her fear said a stranger's hands had labeled something once and a life had fallen like a switch. "Is there a labeled inhaler?" Elena asked. "I have the inhaler," Amaya said, patting her hoodie pocket. "But during attacks I do better with the neb. Look, I'm fine. I just like having options." "Elena," came a call from the front. "We're tight on departure." The father's face measured Elena without hostility, but with an attention that felt like standing beneath a searchlight. The letter's language swam. Necessary, episodic bronchospasm. Carry-on use permitted at crew discretion. "Crew discretion! Let me stow the mouthpiece for you," Elena heard herself say. "We'll keep it up front so it doesn't get lost." "It has to be with me," Amaya said, more forceful now. "If I need it." "I can get it quickly," Elena insisted. The father's voice entered soft at the edge of the conversation. "Elena, right?" He'd read her pin. "If you can get it in seconds, great. But if you can't, we can't afford the seconds." "I understand," Elena said. And in the same motion she'd sorted tissue and wrappers from the last row, She gathered the little case with its unlabeled vial into the black mouth of the trash bag to carry it forward. The father didn't see it. Not the way it slipped. Not the way fear's muscle memory eclipsed reason. He only saw Amaya's eyes widen, saw her body half rise like a puppet jerked by a wire. "No!" Amaya said, the sound catching the attention of row 16. "That's my—" Elena, realizing, too late, what she had done, dove into a frantic reverse of gravity. But trash is not a single object you can pull back. It is paper that clings and wrappers that whisper and tiny vials that slide into crumpled coffee cups and the thin brightness of the plastic bag that makes small things invisible. "Stop!" the father said, not loud but complete. "Please stop!" The aisle around them contracted. A man in 18C made a show of removing his headphones. A woman in 14F craned like a crane. Elena swallowed, trying to find the vial among 100 micro items, and the bag trembled in her hands. She set it on the empty jump seat, and thought if she just emptied it neatly on the galley floor. "Ma'am," came the purser's radio voice, "we're buttoning up." "Elena?" asked her colleague Julian, eyes shifting between her face and the bag as if he could read the entire incident from the muscles in her cheeks. "I need a minute," Elena said to no one and everyone. The father, whose boarding pass read Daniel Carter, stood into the aisle, making himself taller than he already was. His voice again. "Where is my daughter's medicine?" Elena's mouth formed a gentle, useless curve. "Sir, I can fix this." "Where?" he repeated, not moving. And then, because panic likes to conspire with the body, Amaya's chest fluttered. Not an attack, a preface to one. She sank back into 17A like a punctured cloud. The father's hand was on her shoulder. Elena's hand determinedly emptied the trash bag onto the galley floor with surgical care, and still, the vial was not there. "Doors to automatic," called the purser to the cabin. The intercom announcement that followed acted as if everything was normal, because normal is what announcements are for. But this flight had already departed from normal. It had departed from trust. "I'm calling the captain," Daniel said, and there was a quality to it. Not a threat, not a tantrum, but the crisp act of a man accustomed to the weight of procedure. "Sir, please take your seat," Julian offered, posture both apologetic and managerial. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He lifted his phone in airplane mode just enough to show the photo on the lock screen. A picture of Amaya and him late at night, her with an adhesive sensor on her chest, half smiling. He said only this. "I am respectfully requesting that we not leave this gate until my daughter's ability to breathe is not a scavenger hunt." "Elena," Julian whispered. "What happened?" Elena's throat felt like parchment. It slipped into the trash." From 17A came the small, high sound of a girl trying not to cry, because crying makes it worse. Daniel took 2 breaths that belonged in a manual. Then he turned to the aisle, lifted one hand, not even high, just like he was flagging down a taxi, and said, "I need to speak to the captain now." The words spread through the cabin like dye in water. Phones angled, heads pivoted. The purser, compassionate and harried, arrived, saw the galley floor mottled with the leavings of 30 minutes of boarding and the absence that sat in the middle of it. "Elena," she said carefully. "I take full responsibility," Elena said, the syllables shaking themselves into order. "The vial is missing. It's a rescue med. We need time." The purser's expression recalibrated. "We're past push. Then we're returning to gate," Daniel said. And though he wore no uniform, in that moment he wore authority. Elena later would learn that people rarely believe you when you tell them you've made a terrible mistake. They believe you when you show them you accept the consequences. In that moment, everyone believed Daniel. The captain's voice came over the PA with the practiced calm of someone who had earned the right to it. "Folks, we have a medical situation. We'll be holding momentarily." The pushback tug, which had already nudged the plane's nose with parental certainty, paused. The cabin released the breath it didn't know it had been holding. And in the first silence, the plane stopped being a vehicle. It became a village. Daniel stepped aside to give room for Elena to keep looking. He knelt by his daughter and whispered something that made her laugh through the tightness. Elena wanted to be anyone else, anywhere else, and yet the only way out was through. She got on her knees and sifted. She found a half-melted mint, a safety brochure damp from a mysterious spill, a lipstick without a cap, in a color called Sunset Conference. No vial. "I had a letter," Amaya said, voice trembling with anger that couldn't find a target except the easy one. "You looked at me and saw a problem. You looked at my dad and heard the tone you give dangerous men." Elena closed her eyes because honesty is sometimes knives. "You're right," she said. "You're right. And I'm sorry." The words were necessary but insufficient, like knowing the steps to a dance while standing alone on a dark stage. The captain arrived at the curtain like an emissary from a higher altitude. He took in the scene. He took in Daniel's stillness. "I'm Captain Riley," he said. "We're returning to gate. Medics will meet us. No penalties for deplaning." "It's not about penalties," Daniel said. "It's about not teaching my kid that breathing is negotiable." The captain blinked once. "Understood." The plane, a giant that had trained its body for departure, untrained itself and crawled back to the jet bridge with the humility of a blue whale learning to walk. Elena felt the entire weight of every rule she had ever used as a shield begin to smolder in her hands. In the return to gate, she imagined every passenger a juror. She also noticed something unexpected. In 7C, a woman squeezed her partner's fingers until color fled. In 26D, a college kid glanced at Amaya and lifted his reusable water bottle in a silent toast of solidarity. In 15E, an elderly man asked Elena gently if she needed a glass of water. Kindness arrived without ceremony. Guilt did not leave. When the door opened, the breath of airport air moved through the cabin, and Elena's body recognized the smell like a reprieve. The medics were efficient and precise. They fitted a spacer to Amaya's inhaler and coaxed a steadier rhythm into her lungs. The vial, the precious vial, never turned up. Someone at the gate incriminated the trash compactor, but that would be a confession without recovery. Elena waited for the outcome like a defendant who wanted to plead guilty before the charges were filed. Daniel signed a form with a pen that wrote like a fountain and looked at her for the first quiet time. "I'm Daniel Carter," he said, as if offering a handshake across a chasm. "And this is my daughter Amaya." "Elena," she said, and held his gaze because it was the only honest thing left. "I'm sorry." She didn't say it softly. She said it the way you say fire in a theater. He nodded once. "We're deplaning," he said. "We'll get on the next flight." "Let me—" She stopped. "There are things you cannot undo with labor. Please let me help you rebook." He studied her, seeing perhaps that some apologies are survival instincts, and some are transformations. He took Amaya's backpack. "I know how to book flights," he said without cruelty. His voice floated a fraction higher, like a pilot skimming turbulence. "I don't know how to teach someone they can come back from a mistake. That part is your work." Amaya stood, hoodie crumpled in her hands. "My debate theme is procedures versus people," she said with a bare blade of sarcasm, but then she softened a notch. "Maybe I'm getting practice." Elena nodded so rapidly she looked like she was shivering. "I'd listen," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I'd like to listen." They left into the blaze of the terminal. Elena stood among her debris and watched the gate agent reassign seats like playing cards. Somewhere beyond the window, the flight, now hers without them, would refill. Somewhere inside her, something she had leaned on for years cracked, and light came in through it. Daniel did not plan to be the man who grounded a flight. It made him visible in a way he'd spent a lifetime learning how to control. But fatherhood had reimagined visibility into something else, a flare you send up because people need to find you. He walked the terminal with Amaya at his side, guiding her toward a bench under a flood of sunlight that made the industrial carpet look less industrial and more like fabric from a story about homes. "You okay?" he asked. Amaya gave him a look that landed as an affectionate accusation. "You always ask that when it's obvious." "Stalling," he said, and they both smiled because it was their old joke. He handed her the water bottle and watched her count in fives as she breathed. Daniel was director of safety culture at the North Pacific Transit Authority, a job that fit on a business card, but not inside a story well. Once he'd been an aviation safety analyst. Before that, a kid with a poster of a 747 above his bed, memorizing aircraft silhouettes the way other kids memorized baseball stats. He had trained himself to hear systems talk, the murmur of checklists, the click of redundancies, the orchestral logic that keeps metal in the sky. He loved it because when it worked, it meant people quietly lived. He had also learned the performative choreography of not scaring people when you're a large black man taking action in public. On the plane, he'd held the aisle without holding it, brain inventorying the optical assumptions that might launch around him. Disruptive, aggressive, threat. He'd chosen words like tools. He'd used please like a fuse you light slowly. He wasn't angry at Elena. He was angry at the intersection where fear and procedure had kissed and made an orphan out of common sense. They sat companionably silent. He could sense Amaya's disappointment about the tournament tolling in the background like a clock. If her first attack had happened against the stage lights instead of at row 17, she would have blamed herself. That was what she did. She turned everything she couldn't control into a lens to examine herself. He was trying to teach her that self-inspection was not the same as self-blame. "Dad," she said, "you were really calm. I promised your mother I would keep my voice when other people tried to take it," he said. He rarely mentioned Naima in emergencies. Grief could be a siphon, but sometimes Naima's name felt like a tether that kept them from floating into the void. "You also kind of grounded an airplane," Amaya said, the hint of awe tucked into the corners. He exhaled. "I requested the captain exercise his authority and return to gate because there was a medical situation," he corrected gently. "The captain grounded the flight. That's what captains are for. But everyone's going to talk like you did it. They're going to talk like a lot of things," he said. "What matters is you breathing, and that woman, Elena, learning what fear does when it dresses up like policy." Amaya squinted at the runway glitter. "Do you think she meant to—" He shook his head. "People rarely wake up intending to harm. They wake up intending to be safe. The harm happens when they confuse safety with control. It could have ended there. A story about outrage. A righteous swamp to wade out of. But Daniel had learned, late but learned, that outrage without building something afterward felt like lighting a fire and then turning your back on the cold. The airline offered vouchers, apologies laminated in corporate language. He declined the drama of performative refusal and accepted 2 seats on a later flight. The gate agent recognized him, not by name, but by posture. People whose work is emergencies learn to recognize their kin. "Sir," she said, softer than the fluorescent lights deserved. "I'm sorry." He nodded, and to her surprise, replied, "So am I." When medics gave the all-clear, when Amaya's breaths felt like they had gone to a yoga class and come back serene, they walked to an empty gate where a window framed the runway like a movie screen. He put his hand over Amaya's. "You know what you do now," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You write your speech," he said. She wrinkled her nose. "You're the worst." "I'm giving you the story," he said. "All the best speeches tell the truth that scares us. Tell the truth. Not about Elena's evil because she isn't, but about how easy it is to trade empathy for certainty. And about race, she said, not a question. And about race, he said. She nodded and pulled out her notebook, flipping to a page already packed with ideas. Her handwriting was the tidy version of chaos. You think she'll ever learn? He offered. If she's who I think she is, yes. Dad, she said. You think everyone is who you think they are. He grinned and tilted his head. It's a flaw I'm trying to nurture. They wrote. They wrote under the hiss of climate control and the occasional squeak of wheels on tile, under the small epic of a toddler deciding floor was lava, and a businessman losing at patience, and a group of nuns laughing so hard someone 2 seats away smiled. Airports held humanity like soup holds ingredients, everything together, distinct and mingled. Halfway through paragraph 3, a shadow fell across their paper, and a voice cleared itself. Daniel looked up to find Elena standing as if in a doorway between worlds. I'm off duty, she said, already apologizing with the set of her mouth. I asked permission to find you. I won't keep you. I just... Hi, Amaya said, which was kind considering. Elena's face broke into relief gratitude wears when it has no place to go. Hi. She held out an envelope. It had the company logo on the corner, but a different kind of messiness at the seal. I wrote something, and these are extra spacers from the med kit. They want me to inventory them, but the nurses gave me 2. Daniel held the envelope without opening it. Thank you, he said. I didn't trust you, Elena said, and her voice flinched at the bareness of the confession. I didn't trust that your daughter knew her own body. I didn't even trust the doctor's letter because fear of unlabeled vials lives in my spine. I thought I was protecting. I wasn't. I am so sorry. People sometimes applaud apologies. They treat them like arrival announcements. Daniel did not clap. He didn't absolve her like a priest. He let her stand in the space she had made. It is a gift to allow someone their own gravity. Thank you for saying that, he said at last. It matters. Amaya looked at Elena for a long, clean second, like she was trying to see the architecture under Elena's skin. Then she said, Do you want to hear my speech when I'm ready? You were part of it. Elena blinked. Yes, she said too quickly, and then slower, steadier. Yes, if that would be okay. Daniel folded the envelope into his jacket pocket. We're on the 9 p.m. There's a coffee spot in the concourse with terrible muffins and decent chairs. 6 o'clock? Elena's mouth opened in surprise and then reset into something like humility. Yes, thank you. When she left, Amaya lifted a shoulder, a smile hitchhiking on it. Is this how you make friends now? I make opportunities, Daniel said. Friends make themselves. He did not add what pulsed beneath the words. That forgiveness was a policy he wrote every morning, because that's how you stay human in a world that sometimes asks you not to be. Elena sat in a molded plastic chair beside gate C-37 and opened her own envelope, the one her union representative had slipped into her hand after the emergency. Language approved by legal. The apology that apologized without admitting anything. We regret any discomfort, it began. The word discomfort landed like a bad joke. Breathing is not a discomfort. It is the baseline of hope. She tore it in half. Then, because symbolism does not always feel like enough, she folded the halves and tore again. She wrote her own letter on the back of a napkin first, because there, mistakes felt human, and then copied it onto company stationery. She wrote about fear and control and why unlabeled vials were a trigger. She wrote about her brother, Matej, who died after a neighbor's supplement had been something else. She wrote about the day she promised she would never again let a mysterious substance on her watch hurt someone. She wrote how that promise had mutated into a kind of bias that put a black child at risk. How bias can wear the clothes of safety and look in the mirror and think it's beautiful. She wrote, not because she expected absolution, but because she needed to build a bridge back to the person she wanted to be. At 6 o'clock, coffee steam clouded the edges of a small table where Daniel and Amaya waited. The terminal felt like twilight, fluorescence softened by the hour. Elena arrived early and late at once, heart rehearsing apologies it had already auditioned. "Hi," she said. "Hey," Amaya said. Her voice had been sanded by time into something closer to steady. They sipped, and silence edited the room down to the three of them. Elena placed the letter between the cups. "I wrote this before I knew we were meeting," she said quickly, then forced herself to slow, to let the words have space. "And I brought something else." She lifted a small zippered pouch from her tote, clearly labeled with a marker. "Spare spacer and neb mouthpiece, passenger return." Inside lay a new, unused mouthpiece, a spacer, and a respectful distance. "The medkit's stocked," Elena said, "but they'll never miss the mouthpiece if I replace it tomorrow. This one's yours. Keep it." Amaya reached for it and then paused, eyes moving to Elena's face like hands along a Braille sentence. "Thank you," she said. Daniel laid a steady palm over the pouch, then looked at Elena. "What you did today after the mistake matters," he said. "I'm not here to congratulate you. I'm here to tell you there's a difference between protecting your job and protecting your soul. You chose the second. That's rare," Elena breathed. "I'm trying." The conversation wove and unwove. They talked about race explicitly, then indirectly, then back again. Elena talked about the way airplane cabins can compress perspective and magnify power. Daniel talked about how Black families prepare their children for public emergencies the way other families prepare for fire drills. Amaya talked about how adolescents are always negotiating their own autonomy and how asthma makes the negotiation unfair. They said hard things soft and soft things hard. Finally, Amaya unfolded her notebook and read a paragraph. She set the scene on the plane, then zoomed out to policy culture, then back again to a girl with a mouthpiece who wanted to speak on her own terms. Elena, listening, felt like she was watching the exact thing she had denied flourish in front of her. It was both punishment and remedy. When Amaya finished, Elena was quiet long enough that Amaya leaned back, half defiant again. "Well, it's beautiful," Elena said, and then laughed at herself. "And sharp, and necessary. You don't let me off the hook. You don't let yourself off the hook either. That's real." Daniel's phone buzzed with news of their rebooking. He stood. "We should head to the new gate." Elena rose too, an instinct she couldn't classify as courtesy or reluctance to say goodbye. "I'm scheduled on the red-eye to Seattle," she said, as if offering that new parliament of facts might legislate a meeting. "Layover in Houston next week." Daniel nodded, filing it away not as logistics, but as a reminder. Our lives overlap like flight paths. Collisions are possible, but so are formations. "Thank you for meeting me," Elena said, turning to leave, then turning back again. "I'd like to, if you ever want, continue the conversation. Off the clock, off the apology. I want to learn." Amaya's smile was an amnesty. "Then don't stop." They walked toward different gates. Elena paused at a window where a maintenance crew performed their square dance around a plane's landing gear. Procedure, when it worked, was choreography with kindness in it. She pressed her palm to the glass and imagined her brother's breath on the other side, fogging up the view until there was nothing but the outline of a hand. Weeks stitched themselves together by routine. Elena attended a day-long training where a corporate consultant spoke for 4 hours about incident optics while saying very little about people. She raised her hand, polite, precise, and asked why their policies spelled out how to avoid blame better than how to repair harm. The consultant blinked at her name tag as if it were a math problem. The union rep wrote something in his notebook without meeting her eyes. That night, Elena wrote a proposal. Hospitality under pressure, empathy protocols for in-cabin emergencies. She risked sending it straight to the head of training, fully expecting it to disappear into a folder called Suggestions. The response arrived the next morning, shorter than hope, but longer than silence. Interesting. Let's talk. Daniel, in another corner of the map, submitted his resignation. Not a scorched earth letter. He wasn't built for that. But a well-lit corridor of explanation. He needed to do work where his influence wasn't a memo. He took a small consulting grant to launch a project called Runway to Listen, aimed at translating high-stakes empathy into training modules for transit and airline staff. A friend called it idealistic. He called it overdue. Amaya didn't win the regional tournament. Her semi-final opponent's arguments were taut and polite, and did not require the audience to swallow their defensiveness. Judges reward Polish. But when Amaya came off the stage, a parent she didn't know squeezed her shoulder and said, "I will think about your speech when I go to the hospital next week with my son." The ribbon felt irrelevant in the face of that. That evening, when the house had quieted around the noise of dishes and homework, she texted a single line to Elena. "Do you have a break on Friday?" Elena was mid-air at the time, halfway between Denver and Reno. She read the message like a pilot reads a check engine light. Not a crisis, but attention demanded. She wrote back. Landing 3 p.m., downtown by 4. Coffee? They met at a corner cafe whose art featured airplanes made of folded maps. Amaya wore a jacket she'd thrifted and made hers by adding a tiny pin shaped like a comma. Elena arrived breathless, not from running but from the speed of wanting to do right. "I wanted to tell you," Amaya said after the first swallow of bitter coffee sweetness, "that I didn't win. But my favorite judge wrote, 'Thank you for trusting me with this.' So I think I won something else." Elena smiled. "Sometimes the world pays in currency it hasn't invented yet. You talk like a poet sometimes," Amaya said. "Occupational hazard," Elena replied. "If you spend enough time at 30,000 feet, metaphors move in." They talked about ambition. Elena confessed that she wanted to become a cabin safety trainer, not because of power, but because rules were weak without hearts. Amaya confessed she wanted to become a civil rights attorney, and that sometimes she also wanted to become a singer, and sometimes she wanted to do both at once like some ridiculous Broadway courtroom hybrid. "I'm learning how to be two things without apologizing for either," Amaya said. "Welcome," Elena said. "We have jackets." Daniel met them halfway through, eyebrows raised at the sight of the two most articulate people he knew sharing a pastry. He'd half expected to feel protective jealousy. Instead, he felt a gladness that belonged in a cathedral. They started meeting monthly, unlabeling the boxes they put around themselves. Elena shared her proposal with them, asking for edits without flinching. Daniel shared his curriculum in progress. Amaya tried lines from new speeches out loud. They failed together, then tried again with the failures excavated into something like instruction. And then the first twist, the one that doesn't belong in neat arcs, arrived on a Wednesday in June. Aurora Air's scheduling software collapsed under a heat wave and a chain reaction of crew rest requirements. Flights stranded. Crews timed out. Phones jammed with calls that bled into each other. Elena had just landed in Dallas when the terminal monitors became an abstract painting of red letters, and the speakers apologized in 3 languages. Passengers populated the floor like a planned sit-in. A toddler cried into his mother's shirt, and then fell asleep from the effort. Elena could have left. She was off the clock, no longer responsible for anything but finding a quiet corner and her own bed. Instead, she stepped into the mess. She pulled up the internal system on her iPad and began to triage, not tickets, but people. She found a teenage boy whose insulin was warming inside a backpack he guarded like a fortress. She organized a mini fridge behind the barista's counter with a sign, "Medications here, safe and cold. She recruited 2 college kids to push wheelchairs, not like burdens, but like partners in a parade. She found volunteers and gave them bright pieces of paper to make them visible. Want to help? Look for green. An older woman with a face like a beloved storybook character watched Elena and said, "Who put you in charge?" Elena smiled. "We did," she said, pointing to the cluster of strangers who were now a team. Daniel had been en route to Phoenix to deliver his first runway to listen training when his own flight met a similar fate. He texted Elena without expectation. "Where are you?" Her location pinged back with a small map pin that felt like destiny doing cartography. He found her at the impromptu command center speaking softly into the phone, with the overnight operations manager like equals in a universe that didn't usually allow that. "Hi," he said, and then, taking in the scene like a military officer and a kindergarten teacher at once. "You built this." "We built this," she corrected, chin toward the volunteers. "Want a job?" "What's the pay?" he asked. "Glory and blistered feet," she said. "I'm rich," he replied and got to work. They turned a catastrophe into a neighborhood. A priest wandered through with granola bars like communion wafers. A cheer team practiced silent routines to entertain a circle of kids. Someone started a line of people who could translate. A man who had been angry for 6 hours became a logistics genius when asked to help people instead of wait for solutions. The airport security chief stopped by, stunned to find calm where radio chatter had predicted a riot. He looked at Daniel's badge. No longer NP Transit, just a lanyard with his name and a sticker that said "Listener," and at Elena's improvised clipboard. "I should hire you," he said to Elena. "I've already been hired," she replied, pointing at the passengers, and the chief laughed in a way that meant he'd tell that line later and take credit. At midnight, the airport dimmed to its sleep version, and still the strange village thrummed. Daniel and Elena found a moment leaning back to back against a wall painted a color someone once decided calmed humans. "You good?" he asked. "Exhausted," she said. "Me too." They hesitated like an orchestra checking if the first note should begin. Then Daniel said, "This is going to sound like the worst timing in the history of flight delays, but I want to say it anyway. I like you. Not as an emergency muse or a case study. As a person." Elena's silence wasn't absence. It was a considered space where a life could make a decision. "I like you too," she said softly as a seatbelt click. "We're messy," Daniel said. "On brand," Elena replied. They didn't kiss. Airports deserve better than cliches, and anyway, the moment required something else, a kind of promise you make without words. If you'd asked the cameras overhead, they would have said nothing happened. If you'd asked their hearts, they would have said a runway lit up. The airline held a formal review of the incident, Elena's mistake, at a conference room with glass walls and a view of planes that looked like toys. Daniel attended by invitation, and then excused himself from voting, a gesture that made everyone more comfortable and more uneasy at once. The room smelled like coffee that had tried too hard and peppermint gum. The union representative began in a tone that belonged in a courtroom drama. Elena did not hide behind adjectives. She said, "I threw out the vial because I was afraid. My fear has a backstory, but the result was harm. I want the consequence that teaches me to never do it again and gives my colleagues a map." The head of training, a woman named Sora Kim, whose eyes could slice through pretense, leaned forward. "What do you propose?" Elena slid her proposal across the table. "Empathy protocols, a training co-designed with passengers who've experienced harm. Real scenarios, with real stakes. A script for apology that isn't a script." The legal counsel coughed procedural reservations. Sora Kim read with a kind of hunger. Daniel kept his contributions sparse and specific. He spoke about how checklists save planes, but only when they include the ingredients called people. The review ended not in scandal or exoneration, but in work. Elena's disciplinary action became quiet and meaningful. Additional training hours, co-teaching sessions, and a recorded message for the internal library where she told the story herself, not as a cautionary tale, but as a turning point. Afterward, the three of them, Daniel, Elena, Amaya, ate honey cake at a bakery Elena loved because the owner always remembered her mother's accent. They sat in a booth with a tear in the vinyl where other people had written their initials in pen that would vanish in a week of seating friction. Elena watched Daniel break the cake apart with the careful fingers of a man who'd learned to treat sweetness like it might run away. "Do we tell people?" she asked, surprising herself. "About us?" Daniel said, turning the syllables into a subject. Amaya looked between them, the way a teenager looks at grown-ups when she is both child and witness. "I'm right here," she said, not unkindly. Elena flushed. "I didn't mean... Not a secret, wait." "We wait," Daniel said, "until it doesn't feel like part of the incident, until it's its own story." "Good," Amaya said, pretending to be stern. "And for the record, my standards are astronomical." Daniel saluted. Elena laughed into her fork. Honey stuck to her lip, and she considered wiping it away and then didn't because maybe sweetness belongs seen. They took their time the way people rarely do. They went for walks where airports glowed in the distance like cities pretending to be stars. They read books out loud, one about pilots who ferried planes across oceans during the war, one about a woman who turned apology into advocacy. They sat in the back row at Amaya's next regional and clapped like dignitaries and like parents. At one training session that Elena piloted with Sora Kim in the front row, a veteran flight attendant raised his hand, bristling with the opinion that the old ways were the best ways. Elena didn't flinch. "What do you do?" he asked. "When a passenger is wrong, loud, and convinced they're right?" "Ask what it costs them to be that convinced," Elena said. "Then ask what it costs you to be right." Sora's pen paused. Daniel felt his chest do the thing it did when planes lifted, the little drop followed by lift. Only there was no plane here. There was just a woman who had stopped confusing control with safety, who had taken her fear and turned it into choreography that included other people. The summer filtered into a fall painted with leaves like they'd been dipped in sunset. Aurora Air added Elena's module to onboarding. Runway to Listen booked contracts with 2 other regional airlines and a city transit line. Amaya learned to slow down in cross-examination, to let silence do some of the arguing. Silence started to like her. One evening, the three of them sat on Daniel's porch, watching sky shift. The conversation meandered until it landed on the topic that had lived inside all of their futures like a house key no one had used yet. Elena twined her fingers together. "I'd like to say this out loud," she said. "I love you, Daniel." He closed his eyes, just for a second, like a man feeling sun on his face after a long shift under fluorescent bulbs. "I love you too," he said. There, simple. Not dramatic. The way runway lights are not dramatic, except when you need them most. Amaya rolled her eyes, a performance of teenage exasperation which hid a smile so wide it could have been a billboard. "Finally," she said, "my speech writes itself now." They laughed. Then they were quiet, and in the quiet, you could hear the particular rustle of fall leaning toward winter, the world preparing for a sleep that isn't an ending. Later, in a moment that didn't make social media because not all moments should, Elena stood in an aisle, 27B, and saw a woman cradle a child through a panic attack. She knelt, not with a script, but with her heart calibrated. "You're okay," she said to the child, then to the mother, then to herself. She had learned to say it 3 ways, and in another moment, months later, Amaya stood on a stage under unfriendly lights and won. Not because she was better than everyone else, but because she was better than she had been yesterday. She thanked her opponents, the judges, and then, unrehearsed, She thanked a flight attendant who had taught her that mistakes are not the end of the runway, but the beginning of a new taxiway. Daniel cried a little in a way that looked like allergies. Elena squeezed his hand. They drove home, listening to music that made no grand claims, the kind you can sing to without leaning on it. They didn't know what would come. The bureaucracies waiting around corners, the new joys around others. They had learned to navigate by a different instrument panel. There were their 3 names, Amaya, Daniel, Elena, lit. And there were the lives they touched, little green dots on a radar screen you would miss if you didn't know how to look. The story had started with a trash bag on a rushed boarding, and had become a life where apologies did not whisper but ring like bells that call people in. It had become 3 people who chose, not once, but every day, to land with love, to taxi with patience, to take off only when everyone could breathe. If this story held your breath and then gave it back, if the apology, the courage, and the messy, necessary love meant something to you, help it travel farther. Hit like so the algorithm knows to keep kindness in the air. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that accountability can be a doorway, not a wall. Subscribe for more true-hearted fiction about ordinary people steering through extraordinary weather. Drop a comment with the moment that moved you most, or the chapter you'd like to see next from Amaya, Daniel, and Elena. Your voice keeps this channel aloft. Your presence is the tailwind that makes the next landing smoother. Thanks for flying with us today. Until the next takeoff, stay brave, stay honest, and keep choosing to land with love. Turn on notifications to catch new chapters first. Save this video for rough days and revisit the moment you felt seen again.